Owen, McLeod, and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. When New Orleans was founded along the river, now 3 centuries later, the waterfront is getting its latest upgrade. We'll take a look. Like the tide, graduation rates are starting to recede. We'll examine why, as well as the ups and downs of home prices. We'll also look at Medicaid funding issues that could have life or death implications. The mayor had some announcements this week. We'll check in, and we'll also take a special look at the validity of wetland erosion being measured by football fields. On the field for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. Catherine Sayer, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. And Danielle Jottinger, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. And we're going to go over first to David. And, you know, Medicaid, of course, has been in the news about Medicaid cuts with the new health care plan that Congress is trying to come up with. Of course, Louisiana just got into the Medicaid expansion under the Obamacare, and really almost 500,000 people have signed up for that, for Medicaid expansion.
That's right.
So it could impact a lot of people, and you profiled one person who it really is a life and death issue regarding getting that Medicaid coverage.
Right. This was Ashley Volion. She's 33 years old, and she has cerebral palsy. And she's lived with this her whole life, and she's confined to a wheelchair, and it affects her speech, and it affects her, you know, it's withered her arms, but it hasn't stopped her from being a productive member of society. And not only that, but she has advanced degrees, a master's degree, and she's now studying for a PhD, and she's working. And she says the reason she's been able to do that is because of waiver programs under Medicaid. And that pre-exists the expansion under Obamacare. This has been her waiver program has been in place since 2001. But she's still worried because the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, came out with their review of the Senate bill last week and found that it would cut $772 billion. That's $750 billion from Medicaid nationally over the next 10 years. And the program that she uses is considered an optional program. So she says those are the first to go. So we really wanted to show that there's a human face on this. It's not, you know, Medicaid is thought of as a program for poor people who, you know, are not working or can't get it. And the truth of the matter is that there are a lot of working families who depend on it, more now because of the Medicaid expansion. And the people in this area have reached out to Senator Bill Cassidy because he's a medical doctor who actually worked in the charity hospital system for 25 years. And he has actually been willing to stand out from the rest of the Republicans in the Senate and put forward his own plan. So there are people who are going to him. There was a protest. It was not very large, but there were 3 people arrested as they tried to, you know, make a stand and try to get his attention.
So Senator Cassidy's plan, which he co-authored with Susan Collins from Maine. Yeah. Where does that stand right now? Have you talked to him about that?
I did. I talked to him yesterday, and he says that every day that they go, remember Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, the Senate Majority Leader, withdrew the Senate plan because they didn't have 50 out of 52 Republicans willing to vote for it. So there's going through revisions during this recess, and Cassidy told me yesterday he feels like every day that he hears about changes in it, that it's sounding more and more like his and Collins's plan that actually allows for a lot more flexibility for states. And he basically says, if you're a blue state and you like Obamacare, you can essentially keep it. And if you're a red state and you want to get rid of it and you feel like it's too prescriptive, you can do that. His plan, though, does get rid of a lot of the requirements, whether it's the forced having insurance or forced providing insurance for employers, or if it's the requirements for essential health benefit coverage for pregnancy, things like that. He says those things will still be covered under basic Medicaid, but he's not willing to force people to do that.
So is he predicting anything of what's going to come? I mean, as you said, Senator McConnell had to pull the vote because he didn't have the votes for it.
Right.
It's a very complicated, complex issue.
Yes.
Does Senator Cassidy feel we're anywhere closer to maybe seeing something voted on?
I specifically asked him that, and he said, I'm not willing to make predictions. I don't want to make predictions. But he said that if we don't get to 50 votes, that we're going to have to come up with some short-term concepts here, and that he's going to keep fighting for his plan, which is called the Patient Freedom Act, and any other thing. He says, I don't need to have my name on it, but I feel like that I have a lot of good ideas that they should listen to. He has been excluded from that leadership group making the decision, and that might be the entree. And he appeared on Meet the Press this weekend with Senator Tom Carper from Delaware, a Democrat, showing that they are willing to reach across the aisle to come up with a compromise plan if this one doesn't go forward.
One quick question, these Medicaid cuts, that would include the Children's Health Insurance Program,
yes,
too.
Definitely. The CHIP program, WACHIP, that's been extremely important for covering such a large percentage of children in Louisiana, is part of this too, and would stand to be cut over the long haul, the 10-year program.
But certainly nothing has been determined yet.
Right.
Okay, David, thanks a lot. Over to Errol right now. And the mayor had a couple of programs that he announced this week, and then of course he gave the State of the City address.
Sure.
And so what has he been telling us?
Well, this idea of a chief executive giving the speech to the legislative body goes back to the Constitution. The Constitution required that the president from time to time should give an address to Congress telling them how things are. And back then, congressmen was part-time people from all over the colonies, and they didn't necessarily know how things were. And so the president was advising them and suggesting what they should do. So usually it was a written message every year until Woodrow Wilson, who saw some PR advantage about to go on radio. And then, of course, in the age of the mass media, presidents started doing it on television and radio and started to see more political value out of doing this. And especially when you have a chief executive who's leaving office soon, it's a chance to make a statement about what the administration was. This week is a pivotal week for the Landrieu administration. I think it was important that the speech, which was twice delayed, was delivered by this week, because by this time next week, there will be some new players in New Orleans politics, and that will be the candidates for mayor. Qualifying is next week, and so we will know there will be these people who are the candidates for mayor, and so they're going to be part of the debate and part of the discussion in an area where the mayor has had free reign for 8 years now, or 7 years, and hasn't been shy about using that free reign. There are going to be these people who will be part of the discussion. And then by November, you're going to have an election. There's going to be this person called the mayor-elect. And the mayor-elect's going to be a powerful force. And so we're seeing the beginning of a gradual lame duck period. And I know mayor wants to admit that he's a lame duck, but the fact is there are more people out there that will be part of the discussion. So this is a pivotal time for him. So I think he wanted to make his statement about what needed to be done, and he was clear that he was going to be involved with what's going on. The two big issues were crime and the environment. He made a statement about, look, if the federal government's not going to be concerned about the environment, cities will. Cities will take the leadership. And so it was what he defined two areas and sort of like a call to action in both of those. And Catherine, I know you talked to him a little too, didn't you?
Yeah, with the coastal erosion, like you said, I think he pointed to in the Trump era of pulling out of the Paris Agreement, it's going to be up to cities to deal with environmental problems, environmental challenges, and certainly in New Orleans, he mentioned this idea that maybe people don't actually think of New Orleans as a coastal city sometimes, but with sea level rise being just one threat, you combine that with subsidence, and you have a serious challenge for the city. So the mayor is asking different public agencies as well as individual citizens to really come together to reduce carbon emissions and think about these things in the way we act every day.
Yeah, he called them crime and coastal erosion, coastal loss, existential threats to the city of New Orleans. And as you point out, he really does call upon the individuals, too, to drive your car less. walk more, bike more, that type of thing.
And this followed up another major announcement they had this week was that an attempt to get pay raises for police, rank and file, and they said, this is a step we need to do to be able to retain police. Quick to point out that police departments losing officers is not a unique problem to New Orleans. That's going all over. But that one thing you have to do is you have to pay them more. And so you saw a strategy this week.
Yeah, well, in the State of the City speech, he once again went over what he has accomplished, and also citing that the NOPD really has a pretty high favorable rating this day and age, and as a result of the consent decree. But still, of course, crime is a major issue facing the citizens of New Orleans and anybody who visits the city of New Orleans.
Well, let's not forget that he made a decision, and it was forced by the conditions of the budget at the time when he came in. But there was a hiring freeze, and the subsequent years of no additional police officers took its toll. And we did the analysis with the NOPD call waiting series and things like that, showing how it directly affected the response times. And now they're struggling to be able to hit even zero net loss on the police force from year to year. So getting back to a healthy police force is easier said than done.
And he's really been criticized for that hiring freeze, too.
Right.
But he said he had no choice at that point because he didn't have the money. One thing that interests me that he said, while he has not come out in support of any candidate, and of course we don't have any qualified candidates yet because qualifications hasn't opened, he said he's going to be active in this campaign. And he is now the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and he followed up on that theme with the speech that he delivered about a week or so ago about how mayors have to take the leadership role. If it's not going to come from others, other levels, the mayors have to take the leadership role. So he does plan on being really active in this campaign.
Yeah, and how active he can be, we don't know. He does have his own political action committee. He has given money, how much it has right now. There are segments of the community that he's not very popular with right now. And so to certain segments of the community it would be a negative for a candidate to be endorsed by him. For others it would be a positive. But he'll know how to read that. He'll know how to read the polls.
That would be very different than what we've seen for a long time, with a mayor staying active in any kind of overt way after finishing 2 terms.
Yeah, usually by the time a mayor's finished, they kind of just go away, and they don't have that much popular support. You can imagine like Ray Nagin, at the end of his term.
It's a little different for him.
We're going to have a mayor-elect, but we're also going to have our current mayor because they're going to overlap for several months too. So that is definitely going to be
it could be an unusual situation because I know people are a little bit confused about this, but the election date was advanced. It used to be in February because of the conflict with Mardi Gras, they moved it to October and November, but they didn't change the day that the term is. Landrieu didn't want to agree to that. And so you're going to go from November through May with a mayor who is with a lame duck mayor, which is a long time. I can't think of any other unit of government, the United States or anywhere else, where you have a longer period between the time that someone is elected to when they go into office.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see. Thanks, Errol. Over to Catherine now. We're talking about expanded moonwalk?
Yes, so this is another one of Landrieu's big initiatives that he's focusing on as he looks ahead to his last year in office. The riverfront as a gem to put on display for the tricentennial celebration when we have a lot of eyes on us. In one development this week, the city, through the French Market Corporation, approved a $3 million contract for some improvements at the Moonwalk. Of course, Moonwalk because it was developed in the 70s with Mayor Moon Landrieu. This new project will include, like security, lighting, some shade trees to make it more comfortable to hang out around, and then these 70-foot wide stairs that are going to descend into the river to give people a place to kind of hang out, maybe small ceremonies, that kind of thing. But, pulling back on the bigger picture, the biggest news on the riverfront lately has been a deal that the city made with the Port of New Orleans and the Public Belt Railroad. The city will now take ownership of the Governor Nichols and Esplanade wharves, which, those are the 2 remaining working wharves that have kind of separated Crescent Park from, Moonwalk, Waldenberg Park, down to Spanish Plaza. I know when I was reporting on the status of the riverfront back in 2014, 2015, the port was adamant they weren't going to give those up. I know that the port was adamant even before then, but through this deal, the city gives up the Public Belt Railroad's assets to the Port of New Orleans and get these wharves. they're going to be converted to parks similar to like Crescent Park in the Bywater Marigny riverfront.
So it'll just be more of a linear park all along the riverfront then that people can enjoy.
Yeah, all the way
without
from
interruption.
Yes, from Poland Avenue all the way to the convention center, and then of course you have the Four Seasons project. Looks
Right.
like it's actually going to happen at the city-owned World Trade Center.
So what's the timeline, do you think, on the completion of these
So
proposals?
going back to, we want to get things ready for the tricentennial. I think the city's going to kind of scramble and do what they can to get that open to the public for next spring. And they're raising $15 million from the convention center and tourism leaders, I think, to really get a architecturally, impactful thing going on there.
And the Public Belt Railroad goes under the auspices now of the Port of New Orleans.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot, Catherine. Over to Danielle. Graduation rates in the state, and of course, New Orleans is part of the state. Graduation rates for Orleans Parish as well. Graduation rates went down statewide about 0.5 percentage point, but it was more in Orleans.
Yes, so the state has released the official graduation rate. So this is four-year graduation rates. So of every 100 kids who started ninth grade together, how many crossed the finish line in 4 years? And this is from last year, from the class of 2016. So statewide, the answer is 77. 77 of those kids graduated on time. Some of the kids who did not are still working on their high school degrees. Some have dropped out, gotten equivalency degrees, so on and so forth. And so that was 77% statewide. In New Orleans, it was 72%. And the big concern there is that not only is it quite below the state average at this point, but it has fallen almost 6 points in 5 years. So it's its high water mark was 78%. And
that was when, in 2012, 2013?
It was 6 years ago,
6 years ago, okay.
5 or 6 years ago. And for comparison, the national average was 83%.
So we're still low, all across the state and within Orleans Parish, too, lower than the national average.
Right. And Superintendent John White is emphasizing that it's going to get harder to graduate from high school because they've been raising the requirements gradually for what kids have to do and what schools have to do to earn an A on the state report card.
Would you just feed the debate on charter schools?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So this is one of the big tension points in New Orleans is that, as viewers may or may not know, the entire city changed to charter schools, and some are overseen by the state, some locally, after Hurricane Katrina. And this is very controversial. And so all of these results every single year are just scrutinized and jumped on to say, like, is it working? Is it working? And I will say we're still 18 points ahead on the graduation rate from where we were before Katrina. So before Katrina, I mean, things were really bad.
Is that Orleans you're talking about?
That's New Orleans. Okay. Right, because that's where the biggest changes have occurred.
And this isn't limited to the parish overseen schools. This is any school in any public or charter school in Orleans Parish, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And the rates, they vary quite a lot by school, and they vary a lot year to year by school, which is weird, right? Because why should a school be graduating 65% in one cohort and 77% in another cohort? It really doesn't make a lot of sense.
So what's happening? What do education officials say? Why are we seeing this fluctuation?
They really don't have any answers at the moment. And they said that they had to go back and look at what's going on. And one thing that I found concerning is that the two New Orleans school districts, Recovery and Orleans Parish, had a joint meeting with journalists to discuss the results ahead of time. And they gave us stats that showed that the rate was stagnant and that hadn't moved, and they were saying, well, we need to figure out what we need to do to make this better. But then I went back to the numbers and looked and went back a couple of more years and saw that actually the rates had fallen quite a lot. So it seemed like they were more, not fully willing to look at the reality of the situation at that point. And on a state level, the state didn't want to release the school-by-school high school graduation rates, which they always do at the same time every year. They said they wanted to release them in the fall, and initially even said that those rates weren't available yet, so you couldn't look up what your school, like a school in St. Tammany, got, which is not correct. The rates for schools are available because Jefferson and New Orleans sent them to me.
And so are we seeing students graduating with advanced placement and then career type of degrees a little bit more since Jumpstart particularly started in the schools?
Yeah, and that's definitely a bright spot statewide. John White has been very big on pushing students getting some sort of advanced, beyond high school credentials while they're still in high school.
Some
so
college
that could be
credit,
community college, it could be advanced placement, it could be these vocational programs through Jumpstart, and that can really save families a whole lot of money. I mean, I've known kids who, you can graduate in 3 years. You can go on to get a certificate to be, a welder without very much more coursework or money.
Well, what about the impact of the other side of special education, which is learning disabilities and problem students and stuff? Hasn't there been a big problem with that? A lack of access for that?
So in terms of general services for kids with special needs, that doesn't affect the graduation rate for the most part, because if a student is pushed out or dropped out or just takes longer to finish, that's all the same with the graduation rate. I know that New Orleans has been making a big effort over the last few years to sort of seal the cracks that kids were falling through.
Okay, so the push is still on, though, to keep bringing that graduation rate up.
Oh, absolutely.
And I know it is a national effort as well to increase our graduation rate. Thanks a lot, Danielle. Okay, back over to Catherine. Home prices, let's quickly discuss that. I mean, for a while there, we just saw real estate prices, particularly in Orleans Parish, just going through the roof.
That's
is that
right.
sort of settling down a little bit?
Yeah, so I was looking at the data for the first half of the year, and it's bearing out, I think, what probably we've all been hearing anecdotally if we're talking to people about how they're shopping for houses right now. Home prices are slowing down in New Orleans. They continue to slow down in Orleans Parish. And for the first time, I'm seeing some pretty big price increases, average price increases in Jefferson Parish up 7%, St. Bernard up 9%, and St. Tammany up about 5%. So it looks like people are being driven to the suburbs by this affordability problem in the city. And what's particularly interesting, though, when you want to look just at New Orleans, where price growth has been the highest, if you look at just the market of $700,000 and above, so for New Orleans, that would be the luxury market, it's in a little bit of a decline. So in May, the number of units sold was down 8%. Prices are down 5%, and the number of houses up for sale is up 10%, if that makes sense. So people are putting their houses on the market, they aren't selling, they're having to cut the price when you're talking about that luxury end. So realtors tell me they're really looking at whether this is gonna seep into, I hate to call less than 700,000 the lower end, but that other side of the market.
The luxury end. And
Yeah.
are there certain sections of Jefferson Parish or St. Tammany Parish that are seeing a little bit more action than others, would you say?
East Bank Jefferson is still doing really well. West St. Tammany doing well, and St. Bernard, really the whole parish is taking off.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, it's interesting to see. So there will be another report out in August that'll really be a little bit more specific also?
Exactly. So the Realtors Association, their report that breaks it down by zip code, which really tells us a lot, will be out in August.
Okay, Catherine, thanks a lot. Over to David now. And we've been hearing for, I don't know, decade and a half, maybe two, about how Louisiana coast, and we know that we are having a really serious problem with coastal crisis with the loss of our land, but it's been sort of described as a football field, an hour, a day, or whatever. You looked into that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these things that really entered the lexicon, and Val Vermillion at America's Wetland Foundation kind of popularized this, came up with it, and it's a totally legitimate way to look at it, and it actually helped crystallize for a lot of lawmakers, decision makers, how important this was, that we were losing a football field an hour. Now, it was presented in a Super Bowl ad famously of several years ago as Louisiana is losing a football field every hour, which of course gets you thinking, oh, everywhere it's just receding at this rate like a football field. And that's not exactly right. But what was accurate was that over a 25-year period from 1985 to 2010, the average was a football field per hour, about an acre, if you want to look at it that way, per hour lost. The problem is that that really reflected up to a point after Katrina, where there was a huge amount of loss. I mean, in the Katrina time frame, the year of Katrina and the few years after, it was really like 7 or 8 football fields an hour. It was really bad, and because of the effects of the storm and storm surge. But since then, it really slowed, and you saw in 2008 and 2010 that you actually saw major land gains in certain areas, both in the Atchafalaya Basin and in the Bird's Foot Delta.
Right.
And what we are now seeing is that it's that I've been told by USGS that they have actually seen a major slowing since then. So the latest data that was put out was 2010, but we're now seeing that the slowing, the loss of land has slowed, and even some gains have been seen
Do
in
you
the
mean
last 6 years.
Wax Lake Delta, not Bird's Foot Delta, but Wax Lake Delta?
No,
Atchafalaya, I mean Wax Lake Delta, which is right there at Atchafalaya, is growing. It has been growing.
Yes, but also the Bird's Foot Delta in the Mississippi River Delta, right at the end of Plaquemines Parish, was
West Bay.
gaining land, was adding land.
Yeah, that's at West Bay, where there is a diversion, and they've been growing land down there.
Right, yes, I'm
but
sorry.
But that's needless to say, when we are still in a coastal crisis here. We
Yes,
are losing land.
And the point is that while it was not really an accurate thing to say as a current state of affairs that they're losing a football field an hour, it was a legitimate way of pointing out just how dire the situation was.
Making people realize and sort of picture that if you don't live here and you're not actually experiencing it, and those of us who live in Orleans aren't really necessarily as aware as those who live right on the coast of how there used to be land and now there's open water.
Yeah, but at least getting the facts straight, and thank you for doing that, gives more hope. Because the way it was coming out was hopeless.
Right,
I mean,
it felt like it was an avalanche
Yeah.
that you couldn't stop. And now, of course, we got another bad piece of news recently with this bug, the Asian bug
Right.
in the Rosso cane that they weren't expecting. So we'll see how that affects things in the outgoing years.
It's still a battle.
Yes,
It is definitely still
absolutely.
a battle, and the master plan that has just been passed by the state legislature really does
Is
lay it
crucial.
out. Yeah. Okay, time to look ahead, Errol.
WWL Radio announced today that Garland Robinette was retiring from radio. Today was his last day. He issued a statement. He'd been off radio since April with pneumonia, and he said today that he was going back to painting, which is his first love, radio being the first love, but he was on for 12 years, and in combination of TV and radio, 40 years. So
Oh, all the best to Garland. He's guided us through so much. I mean, right after Katrina, he was really an
he's
important
going
force
to his
to
own
listen
personal think tank.
to. Yes, and in his art, he's always loved his art, and he certainly is a great artist, David.
Well, and just dovetailing off of what we were just talking about with the coastal erosion, NOAA says that they will come out this coming week with the latest data right up through 2016. So we'll see what the actual numbers are.
Okay, Catherine.
I'm going to be looking at a couple of affordable housing policies as Landrew, wraps up his year. What's going to actually make it through City Council, rental registry, which would keep a watch on landlords, and then inclusionary zoning, which would require developers to include affordable units. So we'll see if those actually pass.
Yeah, those are interesting issues. Thanks. Danielle.
So tomorrow at the Hubble Library in Algiers Point, they're holding their first drag queen story time.
That's going to be interesting.
Yes, this is something
What time?
at 10:30 a.m. This is something they picked up from San Francisco and New York. And in New York, it was, somewhat semi-controversial, and the organizers there said, if you want to come, come. If you don't want to come, don't come.
So what library again? Where is
It's
it?
the Hubble branch in Algiers Point.
At 10:30 tomorrow, Saturday.
Saturday,
All
yes.
right. Thanks a lot. Thanks, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.